Good afternoon. Namaskaram. Thank you to all. Nandri. And the session is titled Distortion of Itihasas and Purana. Before I begin, or we begin, I'd like to ask a couple of questions to the audience. How do you refer to Itihasas and Puranas when you refer to them? Any thoughts, any question? How do you refer to Itihasas and Puranas when you're talking to somebody in English? Sorry? Mythology.
Indian stories.
So, so I think this is a knowledgeable audience, but in general, the tendency is to refer to them as mythologies, right? The second question, how many enthusiasts? How many history enthusiasts here? Okay, a few hands up. How many of you think that the history you were taught in your schools is the correct history? Okay, I see a lot more hands going up saying no. All right, so what we are hoping to do today in this session, Deepak is, I would say, well versed in the Puranas and Itihasas. He would be an expert. I'm not an expert in anything. I write historical fiction, so I'm passionate about history, but I don't claim to be a history expert. However, what we are trying to do today is to figure out what are the distortions that we have had over time in our Itihasas, Puranas, and the way history has been taught to us. While we were doing this, before we do that, I'm just going to read out a little passage from a book that came out recently, all right? So here's what it says. During the days of Nehruvian rule in the 1950s and early 1960s, Indian school textbooks and most academic histories were written by left-leaning, Congress-supporting figures. These historians tended to underplay the violence and iconoclasm that came with the Turkish invasions, partially in the interests of what they saw as, within quotes, nation building, following the terrible interreligious violence that had taken place during partition. Today, under the current right-wing BJP government, the reverse is true, and the destruction of Hindu temples is almost all that many in India seem to know of the complex but fascinating medieval period of Indo-Islamic history. Anybody can guess who this author would be? Sorry? It's not Vikram Sampath. Ramchandra Guha, Shashi Tharoor. If this was the game of getting hot, 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 you're getting hotter. No. It's William Dalrymple in his latest book. Okay? So things are not as dark as we thought they were. The fact that he is even acknowledging this, I think, is a victory for what we have achieved over the last 10 years. But anyway, so as Deepak and I were thinking about it, there's multiple ways we can go about it. We thought we'd bucket them into 4 buckets, right? The first is erasure. Second is obfuscation. Third is outright lies. And fourth is just ignoring something, okay? So I'm going to ask you, Deepak, to start off with erasure and how do you see Puranas and Itihasas in that context?
Namaste and Vanakkam. So first of all, I'm no expert. I'm just a student of our Itihasas and Purana. But thank you for calling me an expert.
Sorry, anybody who knows more than me is an expert.
That's a good definition. So the first category we thought of talking about was on erasure. How a part of our Puranas and Itihasas are being systematically erased. So it's an unfortunate reality that our entire Itihasa and Puranas have been dubbed as fiction, myths, mythology. That means they are not true. So we have people questioning that, oh, Krishna did miracles, Rama did miracles. How can that be true? They used daivastras that could produce fire. How could that be true? So it's all false. So it's just story. So therefore, it is not a part of history. So that's what we get to hear from the leftist historians. And as a result, what has happened? They have systematically erased our Itihasas from our records. So our students believe that the Ramayana and Mahabharata are stories. They do not consider it as history. But we say it is Itihasa. Itihasa, it happened. So we believe that it happened. But they do not believe it. And there is a statement that I would like to share here, which was made by the icon of the leftist Marxist historians, Romila Thapar. In a program, she said, the character of Yudhishthira was inspired by Ashoka. Now, at the outset, this looks like a joke, but it is a very, very sinister statement. The objective of this statement is, there is no person called Yudhishthira, he never existed. So, somebody after the rule of Ashoka thought of a story called Mahabharata, and they created a character called Yudhishthira based on Ashoka. So that's have been their approach, and unfortunately this approach has become a part of our education system. So as a result, our children, and even we in our generation too, we did not study Ramayana and Mahabharata in history. There was virtually no mention, and we may even have had teachers who told us that no, those are all stories. They are not history. So there has been a systematic attempt to erase our Itihasas from the records. So it's very unfortunate. And even though there are evidences, see, we believe that our Itihasas worked on oral tradition. So it was told by one person, bards sang it, they told it to different persons. It got passed on from generation to generation. And finally, somebody wrote it down in the form of a manuscript. Because the original Mahabharata was written by Ganesha. That's what we believe. That manuscript is not available today. So it was narrated by Vaishampayana and many others later. So later on, it was transcribed into a manuscript. So there may not be enough evidences to call it as history. That's the allegation. But there are evidences. So we have had eminent archaeologists like Professor B.B. Lal and S.R. Rao who have done a lot of excavation works, and they have done it at the sites where the Mahabharata war took place. Hastinapura, Indraprastha, and many other places. And they have found evidence to prove that there was a civilization at that time, and the Mahabharata is part of our history. But unfortunately, we do not get to study that. So we can only hope that our future generations will get to study it. In the same way, in our chronicled history, I'm sure there are many instances of erasure wherein our Marxist historians have tried to remove things from history. I'm sure Arun would like to share that.
Sure, thanks, Deepak. So, look, I know I'm sitting in Tamil Nadu, so this next set of questions, I'm sorry, I used to be a professor, so I'm going to ask questions of the audience, okay? How many of you have heard of Karikala Choran? Yeah. When I ask this question outside of Tamil Nadu, there's hardly a hand that goes up, okay? What is Karikala Choran famous for? Kallanai, okay? Right. How many of you have heard of Lasit Borphu Khan? A few hands. Okay. How many of you have heard of Martanda Varma? What is he famous for? Correct. Parasi Raja. Everybody has seen the Mammootty movie, is it? Okay. The point I'm trying to make is our history is so Delhi-centric. Correct? You all agree? See, I'm a Tamilian, but I didn't grow up in Tamil Nadu. I grew up outside. And I didn't learn about Karikala Choran before I moved here, right? But if you think about it, when we read history, everything is Delhi-centric. You read about our history is a long list of defeats, starting from the Aryans who came, beat us up, and Dr. Shastri has written a book about it, about debunking it. Then we come to, suddenly we jump a few, 1,000 years or so, and we come to Ajata Shatru, Buddha, then the Maurya dynasty, and then we jump again to the Guptas. We lightly skimming over the Kushanas, and post that we come to Harshavardhana, correct? Now, During the reign of Harshavardhana, there were two other great kings in South India, in India. Who were they? Sorry? Aditya. Lalitaditya was in Kashmir, but that was, I think, slightly after Harsha, if I'm not mistaken. There were the two great kings were one who defeated Harsha. Who was that? Immudi Pulikeshi. And the other one was somebody who, after whom a town is named very close to Chennai. Mamallapuram, Mahabalipuram, Narasimha Smara Pallava, right? We don't hear about it. All we hear about is that Huan Sang went to Harshavardhana's court. Everybody has heard that? Did you know that Huan Sang also went to visit Pulikeshi, that he also visited Kanchi? Think of it, if an alien were to come today and he were to visit Joe Biden, Xi Jinping, Putin and Narendra Modi. That's what Huan Sang pretty much did in India, right? Three great kings at that time, he visited all three. But we don't hear about it. We just hear about Harsha and we get neglected. Lasit Borphukan was a great Assamese general who defeated Aurangzeb's army on the Brahmaputra in a major, it was not a sea battle, it was a river battle. Okay? And I hadn't heard about it until about maybe 3-4 years ago when Sanjeev Sanyal started talking about it. Martanda Varma defeated the Dutch in the Battle of Kolachal. And if he hadn't, I might have been speaking Dutch right now. We all might have been speaking Dutch. So the point is, this erasure is what we are kind of talking about. You know, it's not just, in this case, it's not obfuscation. It's actual erasure of this history from what is taught to us, right? Okay, so let's move on to obfuscation. And I think we have a lot more to say about obfuscation because our governments have made it, they are kind of past masters at this. So I'll throw the ball back in Deepak's court.
Okay, so coming to this category, obfuscation is trying to muddy the waters, trying to cause confusion. So there have been many such issues related to our Itihasas and Puranas. And one of the biggest issue is the issue of caste. Jati, which is being confused with Varna. So the allegation which the Marxist historians and the so-called liberals make is that our Puranas and Itihasas were casteist. They promoted casteism, they promoted untouchability. So the fate of those who were at a lower caste, it became worse during those times. So does it hold good? Let's take a look. So there are two terms here. One is Varna and the other is Jati. Varna is class. It is a classification system. So people were classified as Kshatriya, Brahmanas, Vaishyas and Shudras based on what they did, what their work they did. Later on, Varna became Jati. So why did that happen? A son of a Kshatriya wanted to become a Kshatriya. The blind king Dhritarashtra wanted his evil son Duryodhana to continue after him, even though he knew he was incompetent. Right? So probably there is a mother who is a ruler. She wants her imbecile son also to rule after her. So this happened in history, and as a result, the caste system came up. But originally, at the time of the Mahabharata and Ramayana, we had the Varna system. So this is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita when Krishna says, Chatur Varnyam Maya Shrishtam Gunakarma Vibhagasha. So Krishna says, I created the 4 Varnas. On what basis? Guna and Karma. So one was the character, the traits of a person, and the other was the karma, the action. So what you do, how you behave, that determines your Varna or class. So does that mean Varna is portable? Can someone change their Varna? The answer is a big yes. It was possible to change the Varna in those times. So Vishwamitra was a king, a Kshatriya. He saw Vashishta's power and he said, I'm going to become a Brahmana. And he did penance for hundreds of years. He became a Brahmarshi. Then there is one more example of Rama's ancestor called Trishanku. As a king, he wanted to go to heaven and he disregarded his teacher's advice. So he was cursed to become a Chandala. So Kshatriya who ruled the country, he became a Chandala. So how about the other way? Is there an example of a Shudra who became a Brahmana? Yes, there is a very famous story of Satyakama Jabali. So Satyakama was a young boy who went to the great sage Gautama. This is not Ahalya Gautama, this is some other Gautama. So he told him that I want to be your I want to be your student. So the sage said, what is your gotra? What is your caste? He said, my mother used to serve many people, so I don't know who is my father. I have no idea, so I don't know about my lineage, but I am desirous of learning. So then the sage said that you have an interest to learn. You could have told any lie. You did not lie. You told the truth. That is the trait of a Brahmana. So therefore, you are a Brahmana, and now I am going to teach you, I am going to make you a student. So all these stories clearly illustrate that, yes, it was possible to change Varna. And Yudhishthira confirms it in the Mahabharata. So there is a dialogue with Nahusha, the serpent who is cursed. So wherein Nahusha asks about this, and Yudhishthira says, a Brahmana who does not have the traits of a Brahmana is a Shudra. So it is not that just because somebody is born as a Brahmana, they will remain in that category forever. So that was the Varna system. Unfortunately, it morphed into the caste system. So there is a quote which I want to share. Particular attention has to be paid to the fact that this Varna system was essentially a class system in which individuals, when qualified, could change their class, and therefore classes did change their personnel. Any idea who wrote it? Any idea who would have said this? Yes, it was Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar who said it. So he himself has acknowledged that it was a class system. And in another of his book, he says, untouchability did not exist in the time of Manu. Yet we hear the word Manuvadi. You know, that Manu was casteist, Manu introduced caste. So that has been the unfortunate reality here, wherein Varna and Jati have been confused. And as a result, there has been a lot of obfuscation. And there have been allegations against our Itihasa, wherein our texts have been called as casteists, promoting untouchability, and all such things. So the reality is something different. And this is another thing that we need to propagate. We need to make it clear to students especially that, no, there is a difference between Varna and Jati. So when did Varna become Jati? Ambedkar himself says it took place somewhere between the 2nd and the 6th century AD, or what we call now as CE. So when Ambedkar himself says it, so any argument to the contrary can be pushed aside. So in the same way, there have been obfuscation incidents in our chronicled history. Arun would talk about it.
So thanks, Deepak. Let's start with the mother of all obfuscations, the Aryan invasion theory. Okay, I think I don't need to belabor the point. We all know by now that, so it hangs on a few myths. One of those is one find where there were a few skeletons found, which were then related to something that Indra is supposed to have done in the Rig Veda. And so, ergo, Indra was the Aryan, attacker who attacked and defeated and killed the indigenous folks here. The other, obviously, has to do with the horse, okay? The fact that there were no horse remains found in any of the earlier, let's say, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Sanauli, everybody has heard of Sanauli now? Yes? Sanauli has debunked that, right? You've got horse remains, you've got a chariot there, you've got everything there. So that's 2400 BCE. So it's older than the later Harappan period, which means those places coexisted. So there's no reason to still. So I used to tell my daughters when they were going through this, I said, I would tell them about all this at dinner time, and they would say, okay, so what do we do during exam time? So I would say, exams, you write what is taught, okay, but this is the real history. So the so the second piece, Saraswati, okay, the Rig Veda calls it the mighty flowing Saraswati. We know by the time of the Mahabharata that Saraswati had dived underground when Arjuna went on his travels. Balarama, sorry. Yeah, thank you. I told you I wasn't an expert. Balarama went on his travels, and hydrological, geological evidences have shown that the Saraswati probably dried completely around 1800 BCE because the, the channel changed. So half of it, the waters started flowing into, I think, the Indus or the Sindhu. The other half started flowing into the Yamuna. Okay, somewhere roughly around 1800 BCE, which is actually a theme for my next book, which is coming out next year, but little plug for my book. But the idea, again, is there is so much evidence. There's a wonderful book by Michel Danino about this. And I would, is it The Lost River? It's The Lost River. I would really encourage folks to go and read that book because it gives you every single scientific evidence there is for why the Saraswati was actually existing, and the fact that multiple, hundreds of old settlements have been found along the paleo channel of the old Saraswati River. Okay? Again, obfuscation, we are never told about that. Let's come to let's jump ahead, okay? Let's come to the Indian independence struggle. How many of you truly believe that we won independence because through non-violence? Come on, let's see some raised hands. There were some 3, 4 raised hands. Okay, maybe this is a biased crowd, but okay. I see you, sir. It is a biased crowd, yes. But the fact is that we even, sorry? Oh, it's an educated, biased crowd. Okay. The fact is, we have, think about the way we were taught it. Even when they were talking about Tilak and Tilak ji and the others, we were taught about the Naram Dal and the Garam Dal, right? The extremists and the moderates and the extremists in English. The extremists. So basically, you're calling Tilak ji and all those folks who were with him as extremists because they didn't toe the quote-unquote Gokhale or moderate line. That's how we've been taught. And that kind of obfuscation, when we know for sure, if you think about Veer Savarkar and his struggle, the fact that the Raj Bihari Bose ji and his struggles to get the NDA not the NDA, the INA going, then Subhash Chandra Bose came along. All of that is airbrushed out. We don't hear about your, how many people have heard of the naval mutiny? The naval mutiny, very few have heard. My kids didn't hear about it in school, right? Nobody heard about the fact. The British basically faced a full-blown mutiny, and when they told the army who had come back after World War to fire on their naval comrades, the army flat out refused. There was no way the British were going to rule us after that. So the whole basis of what we are taught about in terms of how we got our independence, obfuscation. And I just want to mention in passing that think about the Ram Mandir. Think about all the obfuscation that was done. We've seen it. There was evidences that were dug up, archaeological evidences. Quote unquote eminent historians went to court and basically they lied. They committed perjury. They lied under oath, saying that some inscription that was found, that was brought in from a museum in Allahabad or somewhere. Just incredible the level of obfuscation that went on. And you've heard Vishnu Shankar Jain ji this morning talk about Kashi Vishwanath and Mathura and all that. So the point is, yes, we've been fed a series of half-truths. I wouldn't call them outright lies because there's a whole section on outright lies we'll talk about. So why don't we talk about outright lies in the Puranas and Itihasas?
The third category which we worked out is outright lies. So there are certain big lies that have been propagated over the years. There are many such lies. So due to shortage of time, I've just taken one. So a very common thing which we hear from historians and feminists is that our Puranas were patriarchal. Women did not have any agency. Women were subjugated. They had no rights. Widows were burnt. So these are the things we hear, and we hear, of course, there are issues. We are not denying that there are issues, but definitely they did not happen during the time of our Itihasas and Puranas. So let's take the first issue of women had no agency. The best example we can quote is that of Savitri. Now just imagine, here is a girl, a princess, who says, I'm going to go around the country and find my own husband. Can someone do it today? Just imagine the hangama that will happen on social media and on TV. No, she's a princess. She says, I'm going to go around the country, find my husband. She finds her husband. Then it is found that her husband is a poor man living. He has deposed king's son. He's living in a forest. And there's a bigger shock. He has just 1 year to go before he will die. But yet she sticks to her stand and she proves that she can save her husband. So there is a school of thought which believes that Savitri planned the dialogue with Yama before itself. That she knew Yama himself would come. Why? Because her husband was so virtuous. So she planned that I'm going to do this. Well, whether that is true or not is a different story. The point is, she was an extremely wise lady, an extremely intelligent, strong lady, a lady who had agency, who could take decisions on her own. But yet, the word Sati Savitri is used derogatorily. But Savitri is the one woman whose story is chronicled in the Mahabharata who is so strong. Then, the next instance is that of widows, the status of widows. Who is the first woman ruler of India? Any answers? First woman who ruled any kingdom in India. If you go to Google, it will say Razia Sultana. But there are many, many before that. The first one was Satyavati from the Mahabharata. In the absence, when her husband died, when her eldest son died, she ruled. She may not have been coronated as queen, but she sat on the throne. She ruled with the help of Bhishma because Bhishma would not sit on the throne. Then her younger son also died. And there was a long gap before Pandu could come of age. So she ruled. And she ruled with an iron hand. She was the first woman ruler and she was a widow. So a widow could rule the greatest kingdom in India, Hastinapura. Then, in our chronicled history, there is an instance. So there's a book called as Rajatarangini by Kalhana, who chronicles the history of Kashmir. So he says that during the time of Krishna, there was a king called Damodara. He made a mistake of waging war against Krishna and Krishna killed him. So Krishna went there and he saw his wife Yashovati. She was pregnant. So he said that Yashovati will be the next queen. So there was opposition, but he quelled it. So Yashovati, a widow, became the first queen of Kashmir. So that is there in our history, but yet we are told that widows were burnt. So how many widows were burnt? Dasharatha had 3 widows. They were not burnt. Kunti was alive until the end and she was a very, very important character. So the only instance we get is Madri. So it was more of guilt because she felt that it is because of her Pandu, died. So all these stories about widows being ill-treated, women being subjugated, they are all false. And then one more last example from this big outright lie is about our legend Sri Ramchandra. Misogyny, that is the word which is used against him because of the way he is supposed to have treated Sita. Now did Rama really believe that Sita was impure? Definitely no. Then why did he do the Agni Pariksha? Because he was not an ordinary man. He sat on the throne of Ayodhya. Anything he does, any decision he takes would impact the throne. So he did not want a single taint either on the throne or on the image of the queen of Ayodhya. So he wanted the whole world to see that Sita is pure. That's why he did the Agni Pariksha. A similar instance is found in the story of Shakuntala in the Mahabharata. Now the Shakuntala we know, which we have read about and seen on TV or movies, is Kalidasa's Abhignana Shakuntala. There's a huge difference between that Shakuntala and the Shakuntala of Mahabharata. Kalidasa's Shakuntala is a damsel in distress. So that is he wanted to create a romantic story, that's why he did it. But the real Shakuntala was brave. She came to the court and when Dushyanta rejected her, there is no story of ring here, losing ring, forgetting nothing. He insults her, but she stands her ground. And finally a divine voice says, this is your wife. So then he says, I know you are pure. I know you are my wife. I know Bharata is my son. But someone comes with a boy and I place this boy tomorrow on the throne, the people will question the legitimacy of the throne. So that's why I wanted to prove. So it was the concern for the kingdom and the throne that made Dushyanta as well as Rama behave in a particular way. It had nothing to do with a woman being subjugated, insulted, or humiliated, or that only a woman has to be tested. So we hear the quote, Caesar's wife must be above suspicion, right? So for Caesar it's acceptable, but not for Rama. That's the hypocrisy of our historians. So like this, there are many such outright lies in our Itihasas and Puranas. So there are similar lies in our history too. So I would request Arun to please take over.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, where do I start? Let's start with Ashoka. Ashoka the Great. Why is Ashoka called the Great? Anybody? Sorry? After the Kalinga War, he became like a sannyas and a Buddhist. The Kalinga War took place in 261 BCE. Ashoka became a Buddhist in 265 BCE, 4 years before the Kalinga War. Okay? Outright lie. They don't tell us this. He was already a Buddhist when the Kalinga War happened. It was, so I don't know what we have been taught. Maybe it was a plan to, maybe at that time when Nehruji wrote Discovery of India, he was under the influence of the Gandhi and Ahimsa. So maybe an Ahimsa-oriented king as an ideal to strive for is what he went after. I'm not, okay, circumstances change. But from a historical point of view, it's just not true. Also, post that, there is no single inscription of his in Kalinga where he is actually talking about peace and saying, I'm sorry. There is one inscription somewhere on the what's now Afghanistan coast, which actually kind of is threatening and says, if you chaps don't, listen to me and do what I say, remember Kalinga. That doesn't sound like a very peaceful king to me. Okay, so that's one lie. Let's come to Akbar the Great, the second great. Akbar the Great, we are told, was a very, he did Deen-e Ilahi as this thing, and he was, very equitable and so on and so forth. The man cut off somebody's head when he was 12 or 13, became a Ghazi. A Ghazi is a holy warrior who has killed a kafir, an infidel. In Chittor, they actually slew about 30,000 innocent civilians, and he had, Akbar the Great. He had a mountain of skulls made out of that. Okay, Akbar the Great. 40,000. Okay, so 40,000. Have you heard about, who destroyed Nalanda? Bakhtiyar Khilji. Correct? You know what the leftist historians have actually written? They have taken, there's actually no extant contemporary account, but there's some account they have got from somewhere which said that two Brahmins came, and because they were insulted, they felt insulted by a Buddhist, they set it on fire. Go ahead. And then what, typical of academicians and leftist academicians, they keep quoting each other. They keep referring to each other. Okay? Yeah, and so there's this vicious circle where I will refer to you, you will refer to my articles, then my students will refer to your students' articles, and so on and so forth. So that's another outright lie. So the sequence of lies is just incredible. All right? Yes. Can we do this? I'll give you enough time for question and answers. Let's just hold that. I have one more section that I wanted to talk about. We've spoken about erasure, obfuscation, and outright lies. There's also one where, you know what the unkindest cut of all is if you just ignore something. What do I mean by that? We've heard folks talk about our scientific achievements. Okay? We heard Wing Commander Sir talk about, did you talk about it? Did Ashwin talk about the the Fibonacci series. Ashwin Sangi spoke about it. The Fibonacci series and how Pingala came up with it, right? But there were many more such things. So how many have heard of the Kerala School of Mathematicians? Again, very knowledgeable crowd. When I usually ask this north of Tamil Nadu, or maybe north of Bangalore, I don't see this many hands go up. For those who haven't heard, the Kerala School of Mathematicians found out pretty much Taylor series expansions, Maclaurin series expansions, about 250 years before Mr. Taylor and Mr. Maclaurin refound them or rediscovered them, right? There's a t-shirt. I know you have a few t-shirts about this as a pie as well, right? In fact, they were the ones, in a way, who pretty much found calculus before Newton and Leibniz did, okay? So we aren't taught that. And have you heard of Kannada? Kannada. Again, a few. You know what? Of the few hands that went up, the majority were young kids. I am so happy to, which means folks my age don't know. Please stand up. Let's give them a round of applause because this is incredible. I haven't heard this, seen this. Please sit down. I haven't seen this elsewhere. Kannada was, you could call him a physicist who gave the first kind of laws about gravity, as well as Newton's laws of what we now call of Newton's laws of action and reaction and so on. We aren't taught that. And we aren't taught that because we have systematically been forced to feel ashamed of our culture, of our traditions. Our history is a long litany of defeats that we are supposed to have suffered. Yet surprisingly, we are still here. We are the oldest living Bronze Age civilization still. The Islamist invaders took, I think, 25 years to rid Iran of their original inhabitants. Of all the Middle East, pretty much in about 25 to 30 years, the original culture was lost. We're still here, which means there must have been some fight back, no? People fought back, like we heard. The reason the South, why do we find so many old temples in Tanjore? The reason is because you had Harihara and Bukka and Kumara Kampana and Veeraballala and all those folks, and then the whole Vijayanagara Empire, and then Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and the Marathas who protected us south of the Vindhyas. So, yeah, we are here, we point with pride to all our ancient and old temples, and we sometimes sneer at North Indians, say, you don't have any old temples. There's a very good reason for it. And there's a very good reason why we have old temples. Okay, I am done. I think we can open it up for questions unless you have.
Yeah, the topic says
Discourse
and Disha, the way forward. So what is the way forward? So before that, just one small point about ignoring the Pushpaka Vimana. So that is there in our Itihasa as an aerial vehicle. So naturally, since it's there in our Puranas, they scoff at it. Leonardo da Vinci has made a sketch. Oh my God, that was a great invention. But it is there in the Ramayana. No, it is all fake. So that's the kind of approach which we unfortunately have seen over the years. And we even had a scene wherein, I think, if I'm not wrong, a minister spoke about this in the Science Congress, and some scientists and Nobel Prize winners walked out, opposing that. Yeah. So they are just not ready to accept anything, any achievements that we have made in our Itihasas, because they just remove it. They just say it is all rubbish, it's all fake, it's all fiction. It never happened, nothing like that happened. So that's our sad reality. So the way forward, what is the way forward? So obviously it is the government which should change the ecosystem, which we have been speaking about since morning. So as Anand Lakshmi ji has already done in her institution, she has made her own textbooks that give different perspectives. So the same way, that this kind of a system should spread everywhere. So we cannot depend on the government on everything. Of course, government has been doing a lot of things. We have had IKS. Then NEP has said that Ramayana and Mahabharata must be taught in school. But unfortunately, NEP will not be implemented in many states. We know why. So that's our sad reality.
I'll tell you something
Yeah.
about NEP. NEP was implemented in Karnataka,
Yes, yes.
and then the government changed. And the next day, NEP was gone. So my daughter went into college on NEP, and then they just pulled it out from under. So
I just want to say one thing on this. The minister said in a press conference, whatever the previous BJP government has done, I'm going to pluck it from the roots and throw it out. That is what he said, and they just scrapped NEP. So we don't know how, to what extent it will be implemented. Of course, we need to expect that the government does help, but we need to do something. We are all part of the writing community. So what we can do, we can write about this. We can make podcasts, we can have discussions, and let's try and spread the message. So as readers, you can share this message, especially to children, as madam is doing. It's an amazing piece of work that she's doing. So if everyone else can replicate this, definitely that is the way forward. So I think
I just hope that we have a government that is a BJP government at the center that can do all this. That was sarcasm if you didn't get it.
It's been 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, we're
A
done.
solid session on distortions. Thank you, Arun Krishnan ji and MR Deepak ji.